There are certain surveillance jobs I know I need to be extra careful and take extreme precautions with, so let's go over those in detail. The first one I will discuss I refer to as a high-profile case. These are cases that involve someone who is a public figure, a celebrity, somebody that's in a position of power, or a high net worth individual. These types of surveillance subjects oftentimes have a higher level of scrutiny and awareness of potential threats. In order to identify these types of cases, you need to ensure you have a good list of questions you ask every client. You need to ask for specific details about the subject to be surveilled, to include their name, age, and locations they may frequently go to. You need to ask them to provide you with the subject's daily routines, such as where they work and what activities they do on a regular basis. You should also ask about friends, associates, and family members and get details on those individuals too. And ask the client what concerns they may have regarding surveillance on the subject and any legal issues they may be worried about. It is of utmost importance that you listen to the client as they speak to you. Don't just ask them the questions, quickly jot down their answers, then move on to the next question. Give them time to speak, give them time to think, and listen to everything they say. You have to remember, to the client, the subject may not necessarily seem to be a high-profile individual. After all, they may live with them or live like them or have a similar job. So to them, the subject is just like them. Now, regardless of whether your subject is a high-profile subject, I know you need to ensure you have good private investigators insurance. And here is a quick note from this video's sponsor. This video is sponsored by OREP Insurance and Working PI Magazine. OREP is a leading provider of private investigator liability insurance. Visit orep.org for a quote today. I remember my first investigation on a high net worth subject. I was so excited to get the case. It was the biggest case I had ever gotten. I had to go out and investigate the subject and try to catch him in the act. And I knew I would have to use all of my training and experience to get the job done. And because I was a little wet behind the ears and less experienced in those types of cases, I let my emotions of the case get the better part of me. I just treated it like a normal case. In fact, I think I discounted it a little in the hopes the client would send me more and more work, which, as you will hear, didn't pan out so well in the end. It turned out the subject was quite aware of his surroundings all of the time, to the point where he had cameras everywhere on his property, watching everything all of the time. And you know what? The client never mentioned that little detail until later. Yep, after my first few hours of surveilling the guy, following him around to all kinds of odd places, I get a call from my client, and I was so excited to answer the phone so I could give the client a quick update, but the first words out of the client's mouth left me speechless. The client asked me, "Are you driving a black sedan with dark windows?" I said, "Yes, I am. Why do you ask?" "Is your license plate XYZ123? The client inquires of me, and I reply, "Why, yes, it is. Why do you ask?" Well, the client then says, "The police came to the house asking me about your vehicle and said my husband was worried about this car he saw when he left this morning." But wait, that isn't the worst part. Then the client says, "Then my husband called and asked me, 'Do you have someone tailing me?' He then said, 'Someone has been following me all morning, and it is quite funny to watch him.' I figured you would find it amusing too." Then I got that ever so painful ache in my stomach, and it all made sense to me. My subject had not gone to work yet. He was just driving around. In fact, he hadn't gone anywhere the client told me he might go. He went to the grocery store, but he didn't buy any groceries. He went to a gas station, but he didn't get any gas. He went to a hardware store in a neighboring town, but never purchased anything. Yep, I was duped with the most simplest forms of counter surveillance there are. As I said, I was a new PI, very new, and I was just used to following everyday people around who, for the most part, were usually not very suspicious of anything. That case came to a sudden end. The client never did pay me, and I was just glad the cops never got more involved. It seems the subject was a wealthy business owner who had many friends in local government, including the chief of police and the mayor of the little town he lived in. He used his influence with the police to stop by his house and question his wife to see if she noticed my car. And you know what? He didn't do that to protect her. He did that to intimidate her, as he knew she probably hired me to get the goods on him when he went. to visit his girlfriend. As bad as that sounds, that is not the worst case I have ever had. Besides high net worth individuals, you also need to be aware of highly suspicious surveillance subjects too. I run into these types of subjects more often, and they can be a little difficult to spot up front. Usually the more suspicious subjects are ones involving some level of suspected insurance fraud, and they have been surveilled before and they become aware of the surveillance. The most obvious way a surveillance subject becomes aware of being surveilled is when the surveillance investigator gets burned or made while conducting surveillance. This happens when the subject keeps seeing the same car behind them all the time or on multiple days, or they keep seeing the same person at different stores or other locations, or they notice a new car parked in one of the houses near their house one day, but the next day it is parked at a different location. But then there are the not so obvious ways the subject becomes aware of surveillance when it involves an insurance claim. For instance, if the insurance claims adjuster inquires about the subject's activities they performed while they were on surveillance. Or if they are confronted with questions from the insurance company about certain things and they are shown photos or videos and asked to explain their activities. And I have even heard of situations where the insurance company may have contacted the subject's doctor and inquired if, based on the subject's injuries, they should be able to do this certain type of activity. Then the doctor asks the subject why they think the insurance company may ask that question. It doesn't really matter how the subject becomes aware that they have been surveilled. Once they know it has happened, they will likely assume it may happen again, and they become very sensitive to and aware of their surroundings. Then they may start utilizing those counter surveillance tactics, such as driving around and going to random stores and locations, buying cameras for their home and for their vehicles, and watching everyone, everywhere, for anything, all of the time. But you know what? Even those types of situations are not the worst case scenarios of investigations you may have to deal with. Yes, it is difficult, to say the least, to work with cases with highly suspicious vehicles and high net worth subjects, and they all take special consideration, which we will discuss in just a moment. To me, the worst subject to have to surveil is a subject that is currently or has been in law enforcement. You see, law enforcement officers are trained to be ultra aware of their surroundings at all times. They have to know what is going on around them and who is around them and be able to identify threats quickly. Think about it for a second. If you are working a surveillance case and following a police officer around and they take notice of you, do you think they know what you're doing? Or might they suddenly assume you present some level of credible threat? The latter is most likely in this case, and they have resources beyond what the average citizen has. Even if they are former law enforcement, trust me, they know people currently working in law enforcement, right or wrong, that can obtain information about you, and they will contact their buddies and ask for help. And in the event they call you in as a suspicious person, well, the police are not going to just roll up to you and ask you what you're doing nicely. It will most likely take the appearance of a felony car stop. Using multiple officers, multiple vehicles, and having you pulled out of your car, searched and placed into custody, and taken away for interrogation. Now, this has never happened to me, and you know why? Not because I'm so good and I never get burned, but because I learned so much way back in the day on that very first high net profile case I had. And what I learned in that case had little to do with the act of surveillance, but more to do with the processes and the procedures for my investigation company. I learned to ask the client questions, lots and lots of questions, and then I ask more questions. I get as many details as I can long before I ever make a quote or accept the case. I take this information and I formulate a plan ahead of time. How can I work this case? What resources will I need? Is this a one-man case, a two-man case, a three-man case? What will it take to be successful and safe on this case? What will I need from the client before I start the surveillance? What will I need the client to do during surveillance? And then I weigh the risks and the benefits of the case, and I ensure I remove the emotions from my decision. It is so easy to get wrapped up in the client's emotional state and worry more about helping them in their situation than worrying about your business, your investigators, and yourself. But prior to ever taking on any case, I make sure it is within the limitations I have set to ensure minimal risk for myself and my company. As well, I can make sure I have all of the information I need to prepare the case for the best outcome. One of the most important things I do in any of these high-risk cases is I ensure I have the right resources for the case. I always work on these cases with multiple investigators and set the client expectations up front that we will work diligently to not risk getting made or burned or compromise the investigation in any way. I also make sure I have the best investigators for that particular case. And you know what? That may not necessarily be me. Does this cost the client more? Yes, it does. But I cannot be worried about saving my client money all of the time. I need to be concerned with the outcome of the case and the welfare for myself, my business, and my investigators. I have had many cases where I quoted the client for 2 or 3 investigators, and the client didn't want to pay us for those resources. Then they went to somebody else who botched the job. Then the client comes back and wants to now hire us to help them out. That is one of those cases I simply deny taking on at that point. Now, if you would like to know more about those secret surveillance detection routes, the counter surveillance measures a subject may take, well, then check out this video.